presentation. We will look at what does the research presentation mean and what are the implications first up. So when we're talking about the implications of this task, we're looking at a task that both HL and SL students are doing. For SL students, it's 30% of your final DP theatre grade, and for HL students, it's 28%. You will have three main aspects of this task. The first bit is the academic research. Um, this is about a choice of one theatre tradition, and it needs to be a theatre tradition you have not studied previously. So, for example, if you've done Shakespeare in Form 6, or if you've done Buto in Form 6, or if you've done Katakali in Form 6, then you can't do those same theatre traditions when you're working on your final assessment task in Form 7. It does mean that you need to be looking at both primary and secondary sources to learn about it. I will add that slightly different from maybe the solo theatre piece, you do want to ensure that you've got both written but also video sources here. You will also be researching one performance convention from your chosen theatre tradition. The other thing, and this is quite specific to theatre, and by now I think you're familiar with it, is the notion of practical research. It's good to read and watch things about a theatre tradition, but you only understand how it works by trying it out itself. So you will be exploring the performance convention so that you get a better understanding of how it works within your body and voice, or body or voice. And then you will experiment with applying that practical knowledge you've gained about the performance convention to traditional performance material, a performance material that is traditional to your theatre, your chosen theatre tradition. And then at the end of it, you're going to be reflecting on your learning, and you're going to take on two positions. First of all, is as a theatre maker, specifically as a performer. And then second one is in terms of a theatre learner. So, what will you produce? The outcome of the research presentation will be a video recording of the presentation, and the overall presentation should last about 15 minutes. Now, you've got two options. The first option is you have three separate videos filmed over time. So, as you're doing the first part, you film the first video of 5 minutes, then you do the second part of the research, you film the second video of 5 minutes, and then you do the last part of the research and you film the last video of 5 minutes. And at the end, you put all of them together so that it creates that 15-minute video. And you will need to have a separate document, which is a list of your sources cited for your research. And you'll also insert in there any resources you might have used as part of your presentation. Option 2, the content is the same. It's just as opposed to doing three separate videos filmed over time. It's the one continuous video take at the end of the whole assessment task process. So you'll do the 15 minutes without stop and start in one go. And again, you need to have your list of sources cited for your research, as well as any resources you might have used. Now, the first bit that you need to do is you'll need to choose your theatre tradition. And like all of our DP theatre assessment tasks, you get to make that choice. But there are a few criteria that are compulsory and a few guiding points that will help you in that choice. So the first one that is compulsory is the theatre tradition must be on the prescribed list. You will be penalized in the grading if it is not on the prescribed list, and I will not approve it. Second one, it needs to be a theatre tradition, as I mentioned a bit earlier, that you have not studied before. Now, if we say we just talked about it, or one of your peers looked into it in Form 6 and you participated in, let's say, a workshop they led or helped them out or collaborated with them, then you can still do it. It's something that you've done more sustained research or exploration in that you cannot do. The other thing is, and this is not compulsory, but I do think it's quite important, is you need to make sure that you can access resources on your theatre tradition. Within the IB theatre prescribed list over here, you will see that there are a couple of theatre traditions that are really hard to find resources and sources when you're doing research. If that is one of them, please do not choose it. Then, obviously, this is quite important, and it should be contributing to your decision, but you also need to make sure that the bottom one have been met. Is it needs to be a theatre tradition that is going to be interesting, that you're going to be interested in. It could be that it's something new, it could be that it's something different from what you've been doing. It should be that it's something that you want to find out more about. And the best choice would also be a theatre tradition that will excite you, that you're going to go, okay, I want to do this, I can't wait to do that. And then one last bit that's going to help for the later process of a research presentation, make sure that there is performance material from that tradition that's accessible. Performance material can be written, it can be oral, it can be performance, movement, physical. So it doesn't need to be that. So that's a very first step. And then your second step will be starting the research. And the first bit you're going to research is a theatre tradition. Now, I would say you should have a strict minimum of 7 sources. That will be both of the research of your theatre tradition and your performance convention, because you're going to see that research will kind of interrelate and connect with each other quite well. What should you be researching? You need to be able to have a detailed description of what your theatre tradition is. And you want to think that that detailed description is for someone who is knowledgeable and understands theatre. So you need to use theatre terminology, but who has no information about your chosen theatre tradition. So you need to give all the details and breakdown. So, for example, you can't just say movements are used in this theatre tradition, because that is very broad and there's a lack of detail. So you want to be able to clearly, in a detailed, clear manner, say what are some of the elements of your theatre tradition. What does it look like? What did it look like when it first emerged? Maybe what does it look like now? Has it changed? You need to be able to understand from what tradition and context and culture and history it emerged from. So some theatre traditions might have been around for a very long time, and you need to understand what's the history behind it. What was happening at the time when that theatre tradition emerged? What were the specific features and characteristics of the culture where it emerged from? And sometimes it might have changed. Think of what was the purpose of that theatre tradition and what is its purpose today. Have the purposes changed? And over here is where you might be able to look at what are the differences that might have existed between the tradition now and what might have happened in the earlier versions of it. Now, all of that, if you're very detailed and thorough, you're still at just a description level. For you to be at an explanation level, you need to be able to say why is a theatre tradition the way it is. And that why is really important. That's the only way to get the top upper band. Then the second part of it will be that you need to be researching one performance convention. So obviously, again, you need to give the specific and practical details of a performance convention. What does it look like? What does it look like in performance? What are all the specificities about it? But also, why does it belong to that theatre tradition? And that would be that why will come through understanding in what ways is it relevant and pertinent to the theatre tradition you've chosen. Now, the other thing is when you're choosing your one performance convention, it is only one. Do not choose 2 or 3 or more. Only one performance convention. When you choose it, it needs to have a very clear practical focus, because this is going to directly impact your ability to perform well on the second criterion B. But it's relevant to think about it when you're working on criterion A. Avoid any conventions that are quite abstract, so use of satire, use of comedy, use of dark humor, this doesn't make sense. It's very abstract. It doesn't work. What does it look like in practice? It's really hard to say. Avoid conventions that are not focused or too broad. So if you say you're looking at the stock character of Il Dottore in general, this is too much. But you might say you're going to look at the specificities of the walk of the character of Il Dottore in Commedia dell'arte. That is much more focused, and that would be a stronger choice for you. So this will be the work you'll be doing for that first part of your research presentation. And the outcome of the research will be that you will record the first section of a research presentation, which is titled The Unfamiliar Theatre Tradition. Now, based on the option you've chose, you might record it right now, or you might need to prepare it, and then that will be recorded later on. But whichever option you choose, the section should be 5 minutes long, and you should be speaking as an educated theatre maker, addressing an audience knowledgeable about theatre but who does not know your chosen theatre tradition. That is true throughout the whole of the presentation. You will need to include in presentation citations. This is absolutely essential. At least 4 in presentation citations will be required. If you do not want your work, your presentation, your video to be flagged for academic dishonesty. And if you've got any visuals, any handouts, any videos, any other material you're using, it should be clearly visible. But if you want, that's a bit like on the picture, you can see the video that the student's referring to is visible behind her. This is the assessment criteria. I won't spend a lot of time here because you've got access to it within the Google site and Google Drive document, so you can read through it to make sure you are meeting the upper bands in terms of the requirements. This gets us to the second part of the research presentation, and it has all to do with practical work. First of all, you're going to start with explorations of your performance convention. So this is the practical research component. So you've done your academic research and you've been able to read and get a sense of how it works in terms of the concept of it, in terms of the writing of it. Now you're actually going to go and do it and see how does it work. You cannot remain seated thinking, planning about it. If you're remaining seated throughout most of this section of the work, you are doing it wrong and you're going to be adversely impacted afterwards. The other thing, this is about a process of exploration. So we need to get a sense of growth. So over the different activities you're doing, you're going to get better and better and better at being able to understand the scope of the performance convention through your body and or voice. I've listed a couple of examples of what can you do. You might do solo practical workshops, but you could also do a practical workshop where you're leading the rest of the class. These don't need to be a full lesson. It can be just 10-15 minutes, and that would be already extremely practical. There's going to be a big trial and error process. So you're going to try out things and see what works and what doesn't. You can be looking at videos that you've seen of performances and trying to replicate and reproduce the performance practically. You might start with that and then realize what's wrong, go back and do different things. You'll hopefully be completing activities and exercises that you have either created or that you're using from your research. So other people have created those. You might have some mind maps and plans just to document how you're going to go about through it, but it shouldn't be the main bit. A very important bit, and this is essential, do not neglect it. You need to have feedback from peers through conversations. Now, these feedback might happen because they're seeing you doing your activities, exercises, or because they're participating in a class that you've led them into a practical workshop. But this peer feedback is essential. It should be something that you can reflect on it to be able to go back to remember your process of growth. So because for my peers that was really confusing and it didn't really make sense, so I've been able to do that differently and realize that on top of that I needed to add that other thing. This is going to be essential for here. Now once the practical explorations are done, it means that you've got a slightly better understanding. You're not an expert, but you've got a better understanding of how the performance convention works in practice. So now you're going to experiment with traditional performance material. This work is entirely practical, but, and it is important, it is not a performance and does not lead to a performance. Unlike the solo theatre piece and the collaborative project, where you're both going to be expected to create a polished performance, this is not a performance, because within the scope of a couple of weeks, you're not able to become sufficiently trained within traditions that require years of training to be able to do a performance. You're just doing an opening of the door to understand how it works, and this is what the experimentation is. Now, you've got this somatic, so this understanding in your body, not in your mind. It's this practical, embodied understanding of a performance convention. The traditional performance material allows you to put that into practice. And you're going to try different approaches to see how it works. And it means that you get a better understanding of the reality of what it might be like to perform in that theatre tradition. You should include a live demonstration of the outcome of your experimentation, but do not forget this is not a performance. Now, the outcome of it, at the outset of it, you should be now ready to have the second section of your research presentation, which is titled Practical Exploration of the Performance Convention. This section should be 5 minutes long, and you should speak as an educated theatre maker addressing an audience knowledgeable about theatre but who does not know your chosen tradition. This is the same. And over here, if you've got videos of your practical exploration, please make sure that you are making them visible within the video recording. And for this second part, this is the assessment criteria. Again, I will let you refer back to it within Google site. And this leads us to the third and final part, which is reflecting on your work. Now, if you've been good and you've been documenting all of your exploration, you should have been able to document what you have learned as a performer in terms of a lot of the process. So this is something new, I'm getting to use my voice and all my body in this new way. Now, when you come to the end of it, you're going to make connections to previous performing experiences or performances you've done in Form 6 and earlier in Form 7 before this assessment task, if there's been any performances, and also connecting it to the performances that you're still yet to do. So it might be the solo theatre piece and or the collaborative project. And then the other thing is and this is where now you need to think about it, is how has this helped you to develop your understanding as a learner of theatre in terms of what theatre in the world is. You need to look at some of the bigger concepts such as spirituality, connection, concepts of theatre in the world, and see how this connects with what you've done and how it might connect to other theatre traditions. But it's not a comparison of one and the other. It's making those connections. And outcome, again, we will have a third section of a research presentation, which is titled Reflection on Learning. Now, if you chose option 2, this is now when you're going to be recording the video of the first section, second section, and third section. But if you chose option 1, you would have already recorded the video of section 1 and the video of section 2 before, and now you'll only do these 5 minutes. Generally, the same principles apply, and the assessment criteria for over here is this one. Again, you will be able to refer back to it when looking at Google Sites and the Google Drive document.